So glad to be with you guys again. Some of this, I know we covered a bit of resume stuff on the last call. So you might hear some of this again, but just for those who are new or may not have heard it, I want to make sure we cover all the stats and everything. So the resume stats I love to make sure people understand is just how important your resume is. Truly, it is your first impression to someone, even if you already have an in that organization, because they're then handing that off to the people who might be also making the decision along with them. Rarely, especially in today's day, does one person make the hiring decision. It's usually a group decision. So it is your first introduction to someone who may not know you. The stats show that most recruiters will look at a resume for an average of 6 seconds, and there's over approximately 250 applicants for every job. Now, this was pre-COVID. I haven't seen any updated ones yet, so I haven't been able to update these stats, but to know that that's probably high up in there, continuing to grow. The one thing I do like to encourage people with is that 35% of people are actually qualified, as in the job description for the positions they're applying for. So don't be afraid to cast the wide net and really show how the experience you have relate to what they're looking for. 66% of recruiters would prefer somebody that has work experience rather than a recent graduate. So your life experience, whether it's traditional job or non-traditional job, really will fill into what they're looking for. In 2014, over 18.4 million people found jobs through Facebook, 10.2 million through LinkedIn, and 89% of recruiters hire through LinkedIn. So when you update your resume, it's really important that you get that information out there. And as we've talked about before, for those who were with us, also utilizing those social media networks to let people know you're looking, if it's appropriate. If you're still in a job and they don't know you're looking, please don't put it on social media. That might not be very wise. But if you're in a position where you don't have a job yet, cast the wide net. You never know who's going to pass that on to someone else. And people are so willing, especially right now, to help people find jobs. So use those things to your advantage. 68%, almost 69% of resumes are missing key accomplishments. So that's one of the things we want to talk about today. And 75% of hiring managers have caught a lie on a resume. I have caught multiple lies on resumes. So they are looking at that. So as we learn how to talk about things that gives us maybe a little bit more pizzazz, not doing so much that our big fish becomes a whale. So that's what we'll be working on. So some of the key takeaways for this workshop today is really helping you build a clear and concise resume, ensuring that the most important facts are highlighted, and how best to articulate your accomplishments, having resume integrity, and working with references. As we said in the last one, prep is everything. The more you put into the preparation, the better that resume is going to be. So some of the resume prep that I always recommend is, for every job that you've had for a week's time, lay out a sheet of paper. And as you go through that week, jot down specific projects you might have worked on that aren't traditional. So say you were a receptionist someplace and you took on a company-wide fundraising effort. That's not normally something that someone like that would do. So jot that down. Jot down things that, if I say receptionist, I'm going to automatically know that you're answering phones, you're greeting guests, you're organizing meetings. Those are standard. Help me to understand what I might not understand. Every job has a nuance, and very rarely in support positions especially do I find that the person only did those things. So really try to go back and think through some of the special projects you worked on, some of the tasks that might not be normally common, especially if it's a small company. Man, so many people wear so many hats. So your title may say one thing, but what you actually did was so much bigger than that. So start writing those out. And what you'll tend to find is, as you remember something for one job, it'll be a recollection for something for another job, and continue to grow from there. So I encourage you to leave those sheets of paper out in a place where you can continually see them, and just continually to write on them. And then meet with former supervisors and colleagues. Let them know you're working on your resume and you're trying to recall some of the things that you did that might not be the norm. A lot of times this can also be a great networking opportunity because now they know you're looking for a job and they can help you in getting that resume out there. Don't limit yourself only to paid positions. This is probably one of the biggest mistakes I see on resumes is that people just think, I can only put in work experience what I was paid to do. That's not true, especially for anybody who may be a mom coming back into the workforce. A lot of times the work within the school and coordinating, those are serious things that you can put on there. People are entrusting their kids to you in a lot of ways. So don't undersell those positions and put them in work experience. And then again, your resume is only going to be as good as the amount of time and effort you put into it. So go back to remembering those stats that you have 6 seconds to make an impression on someone and work that resume to make the most out of those 6 seconds. Some key basic items that every resume should have. I encourage people, if you do not have over 10 years experience, keep your resume on 1 page. And we can work on ways of how we edit that to make it go that way, but try to not go over 1 page. If you have over 10 years experience, for sure it is okay to go into 2 pages, especially for some who have been in research positions and want to list out some research papers and things that they have. I highly encourage that. In that, you can lose the margins on either side and the bottom, but you never want to lose the top margin. If you lose the top margin, it's overwhelming to someone and they're probably never going to read your resume. But you'd be surprised, my resume goes literally from side to side all the way to the bottom, and people love it. I've never gotten a bad remark back on my resume. I'm using up all of the landscape except for that top. The top margin stays there, it stays the same. Do not use a clever email. 76% of hiring managers state that they've discarded a resume just because of unprofessional email. Again, this is your first impression with many of these individuals, so you want it to be a professional one. If you can't get your first or last name, try to get a couple of digits, something along those lines, your initials. Try to find something that's very, common and not, cheeky. Photos. I don't recommend photos on resumes unless they ask for it or unless you are applying for a position where you'll be the face of the company. In those types of roles, you definitely want to have your photo on there. A lot of creative resumes, I will say, I've seen a lot of photographer resumes and individuals like that. They do have photos on there, and those are important for some of those roles. And so I do think it's okay there. But honestly, I think it's a waste of precious real estate on your resume that you don't need to have a photo on there. And then always save your resume in a PDF format, because while I have a Mac, somebody might have, a PC and it might open up differently. So you want to make sure it's that way. I personally recommend saving your last name first, just because they could be hiring, they could be talking to a handful of Jennies. So having your last name there will help them to know that's the one we're looking for. And then keep the same format throughout your entire resume. So if you have dates to the right-hand margin, titles on the left-hand side, do that all the way down through all the sections, because you got to remember that 6 seconds. What they're doing in that 6 seconds is they're looking, what I would always do, I look for where you worked, and then I look for, did you hold a steady job? Those are going to be the things that I look at first. If there's holes in that, then it's a flag for me to look into more. And then I look to see if I recognize any of the companies you work for. I don't recommend putting your title before your job, because you're trying to make that connection with someone. Someone is going to connect with you more if they recognize, oh, hey, I have 3 friends who worked at IBM as well, and we may know someone in common, or I worked there at the start of my career. Those types of things really will push you ahead of others. So that's going to be more important than what your actual title was. And then I do not recommend a summary section. There's a lot of people who would disagree with me on this one, and that's okay. But what I tend to find is with a resume, you're sending it most likely with an email that will be your summary in that sense, or a cover letter. The summary section takes up a lot of very important, real estate on your resume that I don't think you need it there. If you're completely switching gears, I do think sometimes it can be beneficial, but I honestly, I've very rarely worked with someone where I said, let's leave it on there. Even when someone's switching from two different, kinds of work, I just think you can fill that space with much more tactile information that'll help that hiring manager than a summary of what you've done. So just some quick things here. You want to have your contact information, first and last name, email and phone number. Another one that I don't think you really need is your address, unless they are specific on they want somebody local, or you want to make them aware that you would be moving for the job. So I don't, again, I think you're taking up really great real estate with your address there. You want to have clear sections. I encourage leading with education. If you don't feel like your education is strong, it's totally okay to put that at the bottom. But I usually encourage to lead with that. It's a quick check. If you have dean's lists or awards like that, leave those in the education section there, and not move them down to what you would have like a leadership or award section. Work experience should be the bulk of your resume. Again, remembering that this can be non-traditional jobs. Community involvement and leadership skills. Sorry, my pup is a little on me after the lights went out. So, anything like that can be anything that you're doing in the community. Now, if you have non-traditional jobs and you talk about those in work experience, let's not, repeat those here in this section. And then professional skills and certification. And again, I just highly recommend, some people have been taking dates off their resume. I don't recommend that. Make sure you have dates. That will help the hiring manager know if you have breaks in your career. So here's just kind of a basic outline. It was a little weird typing it up in here, but this kind of gives you a basic outline of how I think a good resume can look. You can definitely play around with this and make it yours. I highly recommend that. But some of the key things that you'll see in here is that, I don't know if y'all can see my cursor. Can you see my cursor when I do this on this side?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So what you're going to see is that all the main sections, education, work experience, and leadership experience, they are bolded, but also capitalized. So this kind of helps you know these are the main points of the resume, keeping that flow exactly the same. And then the location. So here you'll see Texas A&M University is bolded. The A21 campaign is bolded. This lets you know, hey, here are the positions and places that I've worked. And then underneath there, it's hard to kind of take, I normally don't have a space right here, but underneath that I would have my role. That way, when I look quickly at this resume, if I know the A21 campaign, I can see, oh, this person's role was the Director of Strategic Partnerships. They're right next to each other. I also do recommend putting the location of your company, mainly because so many places, IBM has multiple locations. Most organizations have multiple locations. If I know someone at the A21 campaign, I'm like, oh, I know someone in your London office. I can see, oh, you're in Austin, Texas right now. Do you know so-and-so in your London office? Again, it's really making those connections with people and helping them to understand and get to know you a bit more. And then you would have your dates over onto the right-hand side. I would normally have these pushed out a little bit more. It's hard on this slide to do. And then going straight down all the way to, and this was getting kind of murky, so I didn't place them in here, but I would even have completion dates on when these items took place. So that way somebody can know, like, here are the dates all the way here, all the way down to your leadership experience and awards. Keeping that same format all the way through. So as we kind of go through just formatting, are there any questions or thoughts or concerns that people might have on this part? All good, thumbs up. All right, we'll keep going. Okay, job description breakdown. This next part is a little bit of what I tend to find missing in most resumes. And so most hiring managers, I would say probably 7 out of 10 hiring managers are gonna undersell almost every position that you've had. 3 out of 10 may oversell it. So the real big point in having an intro sentence to your job description is stopping them from happening. So if I tell someone the A21 campaign is a nonprofit, and we're in Austin, Texas, you may think it's just a small local nonprofit that works here in Austin, Texas, and that's fine. But if I tell you it's a global nonprofit serving in 18 locations across 13 countries combating human trafficking, now you get the full context of the scope of what I'm about to describe. So for every job description, you should have one strong intro, and really never think that somebody already knows what that is. Even if it's a company as big as, say, an IBM or Apple or someone like that, help to still understand and give the scope. In a situation like that, they're going to way oversell. So a lot of times what I actually run up against when someone sees that, and as Todd was commenting, they see, you know, the individuals I've worked for, and they oversell something that I might be able to do. And so sometimes what I tend to find is I'm trying to backpedal in an interview to make sure that somebody understands, hey, here's what I've done, and here's what I haven't done. So whenever you tell someone you've worked for the president, they either think you were an intern for 8 years, or you were advising him on going into Iraq. A lot of times people don't understand there's a lot in the middle right there. And so helping the people to understand what that is. And so for me, I put that context in there mainly so people don't oversell the, you know, I've not advised the president on major, you know, policies, international policies. I don't want someone to think I have. So, you know, really kind of setting that bar and help people to understand. And then that kind of goes into the next one, giving context. Help them to understand the reach of your role. So let's go back to the receptionist. You know, I was a receptionist for a Fortune 500 company, supporting approximately 10 executives in an office of over, you know, 200 people, maintaining 5 conference rooms, whatever that might look like for you. Really think through, how do you give, you know, context to this and quantify that? Those two really kind of gel together, because you want people to understand the scope of what you're doing, and really to get in and even if your scope isn't that large, don't undersell that as well. At the same time, you can say, you know, I was a receptionist for a small church plant where we had 5 people in there and, you know, 25 members. To me, if somebody tells me that they've been a receptionist for a role like that, I feel like that's probably a lot harder than some of the other roles, because everybody has an idea and everybody has an opinion, and they're going to be sharing that with the receptionist, and that's the gatekeeper to the pastor. So to me, that gives a different side, you know, side of a context of difficult situations you may have been placed in. So quantify and help them to understand what that quantifying looks like. And then show growth. That's another key one that I often see left off on people's resumes. So if you help with making a process more efficient, or you grew sales grew from 1 million over a 6-month period to 2 million over that same 6-month period the next year. Help them to understand that and to see what your role was in that. If you were the driving force behind that, put that in there. Tell them that you were the driving force behind that. If it was a team effort, don't just leave that out as a, you know, a lot of times I'll see people say, yes, you know, I grew sales from, you know, $1 million in the same 6-month period the next year to $2 million. And people don't do it maliciously. They just put that in there. And I have to remind people, you're giving someone the wrong context of the work you might have done. So part of a team that managed the growth, really put those contexts in there, because when I get a resume like that, if I don't know you, so those who do Enneagrams, I'm an Enneagram 8. I like to challenge, and I like to go kind of see how that goes. So I look for things like that, and that's usually where I'll start my questioning in an interview. Oh, so you grew that. Tell me about how you did that experience. And tell me what your plan was and what did you have to outwork. And I've seen many people get a little flustered and then come to say, oh, well, I was part of a team. My boss really built the plan. I just helped to execute it. Then I help them up. Well, what was your, you know, role in that? Tend to find it's a very low. That doesn't mean you can't put it on there. Just put it in the correct context. And then again, going back to what we were talking about, what were you doing that people may not think of? So I helped a gentleman who was a U.S. Deputy Marshal, and he was applying to this fellowship program within the DOJ, and he wanted to, move into this upgraded program. I'm looking through his resume. He started out as a police street cop in a local community, and he had high-speed chases and parking tickets and speeding tickets and booking people as his 4 top ones. And then number 5 on the bottom was that he was a member of a 7-team undercover drug task force. And I was like, whoa, why don't we lead with this information? Because I'm not going to anticipate that your normal police officer is going to be pulled out for that. And so as it comes to something like that, you know, 1 of 9 or 7 chosen out of, 50 that applied for this elite drug task force. Quantify those things as well. Help them to understand just kind of the level of what you were pulled out for. I love this meme. I like to just, kind of share this one. It says, how would you write, I changed a light bulb on your resume? Single-handedly managed the successful upgrade and deployment of a new environmental illumination system with 0 cost overturns and 0 safety incidents. Listen, I like that. I am totally on board with that. If you've got to try to search for those types of stuff, write it like that. Make sure you're using words that are professional. And a lot of times people don't realize that, I get a lot of individuals who will say to me, well, I was just a cashier. And I'll say, well, did you have to manage and close out a till every night? And how many people were coming through? And how many irate customers did you have to deal with? So people like to undersell themselves, but I need you to help upsell yourself. So every time you're thinking about, how do I write this? I want you to come back to the slide and think, okay, how do I single-handedly successfully upgrade and deploy a new environmental illumination system? That's how I want you thinking through it in that way. Into your skills section. This is another section that I usually make a lot of edits on. I would definitely take off any soft skills that you have here. So anything that says, self-driven or, assertive, things like that, or, that's fine. They will get that in the interview, unless you're needing to fill space, or something along those lines. We can work on something like that. You want these to be hard skills, certifications that you have, foreign languages. If you have any foreign languages, that should be one of the top things you put on your resume, unless someone's specifically asking for a specific certification you might have. So really think through some of those things. High-level computer skills. Please don't list Microsoft or Google Suites. That's kind of a standard. You should know that. And if you don't have a great working knowledge of those right now, there's lots of classes online that you can take that gives you that. And I highly recommend that for anyone, especially people re-entering the workforce. I know you may not be used to dealing with all of those, and they've changed over the years. So definitely become familiar with that, because people will just assume that you have that working knowledge on day one. And then any recognitions that you might have received at work, you want to make sure you put those in there. If they're not listed within your work experience, or something you may have received from a trade association, overall you want to highlight those here, and then also put out when you receive those. So with that, any questions on descriptions or skills, anything along those lines?
Not a question, but I just really wanted to highlight some of the things I thought you were really talking about here in the last couple of seconds, Michelle. I really like the, talking about the is and is not of things, right? And because there's a lot of clarity, like when you were saying, make, like how you had to downsell yourself, right? Sometimes to some degree, because people can get a wrong expectation. So there's a lot of clarity that happens when you say it is this, but it's not this, right? In some context, right? So I thought that was really great. And then I'm a big fan of the show growth thing, right? I think that everybody needs to figure out how you can show the benefit of what you did, not just what you did, right? What's really important is how did that benefit the organization? And I thought that was fabulous. So just chiming in on you there a little
I
bit.
love it. I love it. It's like getting an amen in church. I need that every now and again. It's so weird doing the Zoom presentations because it's hard to get feedback too because you're looking at your notes and yeah, no, I appreciate that. Please keep those coming.
Yeah, one other thing I thought, I love the little thing you were showing about upselling yourself, which is really important, right? Like
Yeah,
certainly claim the highest thing you can claim and figure out how to say that. But what might be a fun exercise for people too, because just like you gave the example of somebody sort of overselling themselves by not
yeah,
adding the context. I recently had somebody do just the opposite. They said, write what you do in the most unimpressive way. And so then when you do that, not necessarily to put it on your resume, but just to kind of think about how somebody else might view, like when you say it that way, you kind of go, wow, somebody might view it like that, right? So like,
yeah.
it just gave you some additional context in your own mind to think like, oh, wow, this is kind of what I can do, what this is if I'm saying it in the most unimpressive way. That might help you kind of think about like, okay, that's not how I want somebody to perceive it. So,
Yep.
how do I make sure they don't?
And don't undersell yourself. I think that's the thing I see the most is people undersell themselves and helping to understand that without it's, going back to the biblical side, without like we're all members of one body and without our finger, my body is still not going to operate. I threw my back out this morning and I can tell you that all day as I've been standing up and moving, it's thrown off everything that I've done today. So, don't ever undersell the importance of what your role is to the greater business and helping them to understand that I think is huge for sure. So in that, moving on to leadership and community involvement, I've seen this named all sorts of ways. It'll depend on the information you're highlighting in there. Kind of look at what you're highlighting and then title this section in that type of way. So it could be leadership, community involvement, it could be awards and recognitions, anything like that that helps them understand this is going to be kind of subset of what we've already talked about up here. So this again shows more of who you are. So y'all may have seen on mine, I do put, that I have my CrossFit L1 on there because, we crazy CrossFitters, we connect with everybody and that's an instant connection with those people. I also put that I'm personal security certified. People always find that super interesting, especially for a woman. They want to know about that. And that kind of helps. Like I've even had one person go, I just wanted to know, I was a horse wrangler in college. And when I interviewed at the White House, the guy who came in before me was actually the intern in the office I was interviewing for. And the most thing that they asked me about was me being a horse wrangler when I was in college. And most people would say, why do you need to put that on there? Obviously, it's not still on my resume, but it really taught me a lot about, all sorts of different, like you have timing and taking care of the horse, all of that type of stuff. But at the same time, it was a little kitschy. It was something different. And for the individuals that they had seen, I was the first person to have that on their resume. And I would say that literally took up almost half of my interview was talking about the summer I was a horse wrangler. So, on those types of things, if you have something like that you think, well, that doesn't make sense to put on my resume, this is a key section where you can put it on there and you make that connection with that person who's like, I rode horses. And so the woman who was interviewing me, she rode horses all through her childhood. And so really talk through that. And that connection was a key point for us. So don't undersell those things. If you have a hobby that you really take a lot of time in and you've been, serving in some sort of way, whether that's in a community group that's been built, started and lead a community group for model car builders. Don't think that you can't put that on there. You're really showing who you are as a person and also, again, making those connections. So talk about those things. And then also remember the audience that you're speaking to, though, and don't use terms that they may not know. So don't use acronyms, and I would say that for your whole entire resume, but make sure that you speak in a way that they can understand what you did, but it's not in lingo that only people within that group might know. And then again, as I said earlier, if you've not been working in a traditional job and you use those jobs in work experience, let's not restate them. done here. So I've seen a ton of resumes where it's moms entering back into the workforce. And so we're helping them to understand, hey, here's some ways we can talk about the work you have been doing. And then they restate it in this section. I wouldn't do that here. Try to think of some other things that make you more, that are just fun, personal things that people can enjoy. Again, also any types of awards or recognitions that you may have received that would be outside of specific roles, make sure you put those in here. Is there any questions on leadership and community involvement, things that could be included but not be included?
Yeah, Michelle, if you don't mind, I'd like to chime in. I was just listening to a thing today with the CEO from Netflix, and he was talking about, it was about their culture. And one of the things he was talking about on that is that they were really in defining their culture. One of the things he said about in the US, we tend to be very efficient. We get to know somebody, especially in a work context based on what they did, right? Which is kind of what a resume is. What'd you do? What'd you do? What'd you do? But in being a global company, they were trying to figure out how to codify their culture. And they looked at Brazil, which was much more relational. They would spend more time on what did you do? What's my family doing? What am I doing afterwards, et cetera. And what they found is actually that if a little bit of time was given to that it was actually more efficient to have that aspect of relational and to lead with that than it was to actually even lead with what you're doing. So I don't think on the resume, you want the resume to certainly talk about what you did, but to the point you're talking about, when somebody can connect with you relationally, they're way more likely to want to connect with you in more ways than if they can just connect with what you did. So, the things you just talked about, it's really true that we really are much more relational than we want to give ourselves credit for, even in the U.S. culture.
Yeah. And I think even now, the more, especially even now, now that we're in COVID, I would say this even before COVID, the more virtual we've gotten, the more we've gotten behind, emails and all of that. I find that hiring managers really do enjoy the time that they get to interview with someone, and not just getting through HR, but then once you get to specific roles, you're meeting people that you have the possibility of working the next 10, 15 years with. So they want to know, are you going to gel well? Like with A21, we have a slogan that's pretty well known for lots of organizations, but we're slow to hire and we're quick to fire. So it took probably about 2.5 months for me to get on team. And that was with the CEO pushing for me to get this role. And that was because I met with so many people, because it was such a small team, that one cog that may not have fit well in that team could throw off all of the work. And so relationally, people getting to know you on that side, especially now, I feel like is so important, and it helps kind of break down some of the walls and make those connection points that we're not always making. So put it on there if you've done it, if you've accomplished something through it, if it's how you spend your off time, definitely put it on there. And it's a great, it's just one line. I think it's great use of real estate there.
I'd like to chime in, Michelle. That's a great point. I would say that we, at Whole Foods Market, where I work, there's a huge focus on community involvement and volunteering, just because that's what the company is. When we look for particular folks, one of the things we look for resumes and on LinkedIn profiles are, have they volunteered? What community involvement are they part of, et cetera. So I think not just listing it, I know you've already said this, but share a little bit of what you did and how you're involved. And I think that will take it to the next level. And that one piece could be the point of, you're different, like that horse, your horse. And I mean, we talk about that in interviews as well, and love to see when people separate themselves from that perspective.
Yep. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so going through the review. So now you've done all this work, you've typed your resume up, and you think you're done, and now I'm telling you, you're definitely not done. I highly encourage, one of the things that very few people do, that is probably one of the best things that you can do, is send your updated resume 2 former supervisors or colleagues. One, and ask them, do they feel like this is reflective of the work you did? Say, hey, I'm updating my resume. I want to help myself stand above the competition. But as I've written it, I just want to make sure that you feel comfortable that I am reflecting the work we accomplished correctly. And one, that's going to really go well if they end up getting called, because sometimes, and I've done this to applicants before, I'll know someone who worked at a company where they've worked, or I've potentially even known their supervisor. It's not listed as their reference, but I will call and get a reference from that person because I trust that person. And so then I'm like, hey, can you tell me about how was it to work with this individual? I have caught a couple of lies in the reference process that are even references that the individuals gave me. And so in that, it really just helps stops any type of questioning that might come if that person is ever asked a question about your work there. Definitely, I think that is really great too. It also is a great purpose in that if you did not reach out to them already, now they're super impressed that you did, because I bet they could probably count on one hand the number of people that have ever done that. And then 2, they're going to be willing to potentially open up their network and help you find a job. Someone who goes back and says, hey, I just want to make sure this reflects what we did together. To me, if somebody proactively did that without me telling them, I'm going to think, man, that person's got great integrity. And if I pick up the phone and make a call on their behalf, and I've already got the work experience with them already, but I'm going to feel even more comfortable in that, to know like, hey, they're going above and beyond. And those are the types of people I want on my team. Those are the types of people other people want to be able to promote. So I highly recommend that. Just let them make edits too. And a lot of times I've done this. I've never had somebody edit. I've actually had them always add to it. And they'd be like, oh, hey, remember when we did this? Or, you know what, you really led this team more than, like, it's been all of those types of stuff. So I highly recommend doing that. Now, again, if your supervisor doesn't know you're looking for a job, please don't do this. Just wait. But if they do know that you're out looking, or if they're an old supervisor, 100% please send this to them. And then I always recommend to ask multiple people who are outside of your field to read over the resume, especially if you're switching fields. And this will help you know if as you're contextualizing things, as you're helping people to understand what you're writing there, does someone who's not worked in your industry, can they understand what you've accomplished? Do they get it? And that's, please give people the full ability to be as open and honest with you as possible. You're not going to get great feedback without that. And then, of course, ask them to look for spelling, grammatical errors. A friend of mine, when I joined his company, he was writing up a bio to put out the press release, and he found a spelling error in my resume. And I can't tell you the number of people who've read over my resume. And I mean, I just died laughing, which just shows, like, even if you've got, tens of people, I don't give it to hundreds of people, but I have my resume reviewed by a number of people anytime I know I'm about to switch, and none of them caught this small spelling error. So somebody's going to catch some. You've been looking at it so much, by the time you get to this point, there's probably some things in there and errors that you're not going to see because you've seen it so much. So ask them to look at it for that way. Ask them to, does this make sense? Do you think this reflects, who I am, of what you know of me as well? And then send thank you notes to everybody who's reviewed your resume. The power of a handwritten thank you note is so undersold in today's day and age. So I will recommend it in everything that I do. If somebody goes out of their way to help you along the way, send them a thank you note. Goes a long way, especially once we get into the hiring process, and we talked about that interviewing, but a handwritten note goes a really, really long way. As it comes to references, I think everybody should have at least 3 references. That's usually what people ask for. Be prepared for 5. I've had some companies where they ask for a few more references. These should be job supervisors, individuals you've reported to, or individuals who've reported to you. Those are great ones to put in there if you have a great working relationship and you're also going to another job where you'll be managing people. Don't undersell the importance of giving them a reference of somebody who's worked under you on on your team. Those can actually be sometimes way better than people who worked over you, because they're seeing you day to day, and the way that they can tactily talk about the work you've done is usually far superior. And again, very few people do that. And so to me, if somebody says, hey, here was my team lead who reported to me, and this, role, to me, that's going to show that you have a good level of integrity if somebody who reported to you is going to be listed as a reference. So it doesn't have to be the CEO of the company. People who can really speak about your day-to-day work, how you work with others, how you tackle jobs, how you tackle hard things, those are going to be the people that are going to give someone the best reference for you, rather than a standard, she did all the great things. We're so grateful she was on our team. Like, I've gotten some of those and I'm like, this doesn't help me with anything. So really giving them some of those people is really good. Even if someone you volunteer alongside, if it's you volunteering at church and it's a pastor or the team lead, or if you're coming out of college, a professor, anybody coming out of college, I recommend trying not to have more than one professor, but I do understand sometimes that can be a bit tight. I really highly recommend never using family members unless you worked in a family-owned company. And even then, you maybe only want one, and then you got to find a couple other people. Because if you only have family members vouching for you, that's a big concern for me. And then again, I wouldn't list these folks on your resume, references upon request. The big thing on there is that if I'm listed as a reference for someone, and this has happened to me where I just get a phone call randomly, that individual didn't know that they were calling the references beforehand. It wasn't like, she didn't, tell me ahead of time. I just didn't know they were going to call, and it threw me off in the middle of the workday. It really is respecting your references time, that you give. Like, so if I say, hey, you've moved on, would love some references from you, then you can call me and say, hey, Michelle, I've made it through this process. You're probably getting a phone call. Send your resume to your references along with the job description, along with any talking points of why you're great for this job. If you want them to hit on things that you have done and accomplished, let them know that. That's okay. People use talking points for everything. So it's all up to them if they want to use it or not. Especially, this is also super helpful if you're switching industries. So say you're switching industries and you're telling your old boss, like, I'm going to make this big switch. I think this is going to be great. Here's why I think that I am capable for what they're looking for, even though the job description may be beyond what I can, what's on my resume. That helps them. That helps me know. And I can look at that and go, I agree with these talking points, or I'll say, I don't agree with these talking points, and I'll say something that I want to say. So feel free to send that. Don't feel like that's a bad thing. You're actually really helping that individual to make the most of their time and also make the most of that reference for you. Again, make sure you tell them beforehand, and then send them a thank you note after they do it for every time they're a reference for you. So if you are applying to multiple places, send them a note for each time they've done that. Maybe drop in a Starbucks gift card or something along the way. That will go over super, super well for them, and they'll be a great reference for you for life. So any questions? That kind of wraps up the big stuff on that. I think I did much better on time this time than I did last time. I tried to be a little bit more succinct this time, y'all.
That was great.
Awesome.
Guys?
Yeah, really good.
Any questions or on any of it, or how to talk about anything? All right, I will show one last thing. The organization I work for, the A21 Campaign, we are doing a summit on October 17th. Don't let the word summit scare you. It's a 1-hour event to really help people understand what human trafficking looks like. And the big reason I want to push this, there's a lot of scare tactics, I would call, floating around on social media right now that aren't, they're probably the 0.001% of what human trafficking looks like. And so this is not an A21 commercial. It really is a educational event. It's totally free. You can just sign up like you do here, and it's on demand. So you can have it any day, anytime on October 17th. Super educational. Our team across the globe will be speaking about how things go, but I highly recommend you guys to check it out. You can find the information at a21.org. It's right there on our main page. And if you hear anybody who's like, kind of talking about, people getting kidnapped at Walmart or Target, pass this to them, because I'm not saying that kidnapping doesn't happen, but that's not how trafficking happens. So we just want to help people to understand and not be scared by things that they shouldn't be.
This is Todd Boyum, and we hope you enjoyed this presentation of Fellowship Career Network. We meet every Monday evening from 6:30 to 8 p.m., and we hope you'll join us soon. To register and receive the Zoom link in your email, simply go to fellowshipcareernetwork.com today.